Welcome to this week's episode of Safety Culture Solutions, brought to you by Safety Culture Strategies. I'm Mike Kinney, your host, and today it's always interesting when we get together, and today we have Mr. Shawn Galloway. He is president and COO of ProAct Safety, and he has been involved in programs literally throughout the world. He has a series of the country's flags on his website, and there is, 30 or 40 of the whole pile. Lots of references. He's been at this for a long time. He's worked with Bristol Myers, Starbucks, just a long list of them. He has hosted over, I got to check all my data here. I think around 600 podcasts, 200 articles, about 100 videos, and he has deservedly been the recipient of numerous awards from the American Society of Safety Professionals, top 40 rising stars, ESH Days magazine, 50 people who most influence ES&H, and leaders in the ESH world and their newest list, 50 leaders of today and tomorrow. So I'm honored to have him with us. And Shawn, I think we're all set up for you. Are you there, kind sir?
I sure am. Great to be here with you.
Good. And so how's everything going for you today, boss?
Fantastic. I'm in Houston, Texas, and it's no longer freezing. We don't have any pipes bursting. So it's heading into summer. It'll probably be about 150 degrees in a couple of months. So
exactly.
We're right in that middle space between summer and winter, and usually summer's most of the year. So
there you go. Like in Vegas, like July and August, especially, we tell everybody it's a dry heat, kind of like a solar flare. Then we have the humidity of a saltine cracker. So hopefully it balances out. Well, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. And we want to talk some philosophical things about culture. And then candidly, you and I've chatted a lot. And I think there's a couple of items after the commercial break, second half of the show, that I really want us to touch on because I think there's a great message there as well for all the viewers. So from your perspective, just what do you think is the one thing that is most important for the senior leaders, senior management of a company regarding being able to have a positive safety culture?
I think it's having a strategy, and It's too often that a lot of organizations don't have a strategy. So if you have a positive safety culture as a goal, I would argue if you take the top 7 leaders of an organization, I'm just picking a number, if you take the top 7 leaders and ask them to define what a positive safety culture looks like, I think on average, because I've done this a few hundred times, you'll get 5, if not 6 distinctly different answers. And if at the top of the organization, those leaders aren't on the same page, well, it's no wonder we create so many different cultures, or worse, safety cultures, as their values and edicts cascade throughout the organization. So to me, it's clearly defining what we want, clearly defining where we're at against that ideal, identifying no more than a handful of strategic priorities, and a scorecard that's measuring not just what we don't want, we're distancing ourselves from our failures, that we're actually closing the gap and measuring what we want. All of that takes strategic planning. And what's great when you're talking about the most senior level of the organization, that's how they approach business. They're not out there with a goal like, you know what our strategic objective is this year? Let's fail our customers less. That's not their goal. Their goal is to create greater market share, market capitalization, and how they do that is a strategy. My thinking is you need to have the same strategic thinking, because the market share cultural improvement efforts operate in is the attention share of the workforce. What are we doing to capture attention and get a return on that attention? Are we marketing what we're trying to do? Are we getting more discretionary effort? But to me, it goes back to, we've written a couple of books on this because we see how important it is. Take the thinking that we do to approach the market and winning with customers, look at that inside our organization, and take that strategy inside.
I like it because you're right. From the business sector, when you're looking at ROI, just where we percentage of sales, you're always you want to be focused on what it takes to be successful. But inevitably, with a lot of companies, they measure safety on how many people got hurt.
A friend of mine and client, his name is Kelvin, and him and I were talking a couple of years ago after sitting in some different high-level meetings. He said, it's interesting that really only safety, and there's a couple of others, but his comment was only safety is where a downward trending curve is viewed as a good thing. Yeah, I know and that's, so and that's what's led. So I loved your comment, but that's what's led organizations over the last 10 to 15 years, and even more so over the last few years, to measure differently. The world's three-dimensional, as my partner Terry Mathis says, the world's three-dimensional, so our measurement should be three-dimensional. And the way we approach it and what we're measuring should be two things. Are the things we're doing of value? Are we doing the right things? And the other is, are we creating the perception of value? If we're doing things that, Mike, you and I see as this is what needs to be done, but we end up upsetting our customers, the supervisors, the employees, we're not winning, we're failing more. And if we unintentionally disengage the very people whose engagement's necessary for us to be successful, that's not winning. And safety should be about winning and our pursuit of winning versus just trying to fail less.
Exactly correct. And you've kind of already gave us some great answers on this one, but when I kind of go through my process, if you will. So what have you seen as some key attributes for a positive safety culture? I think candidly, you've already touched on a couple of them.
So the first one I would touch on is focus. So I think that there's a lot of attributes, but let me state that the attributes are often going to be different based on the maturity and the current state of each organization. If you have an organization that's kind of in the 1980s still about how we're looking at safety, then we need to focus on really the basics versus those that are trying to become a highly reliable organization, really understanding human performance principles, all of that type of stuff. Their attributes are going to be way well and beyond. But one of the first I would say is once you've matured, you move from a focus on safety, and that's that argument that's still out there. Should safety be a priority? Should it be a value? So there's a focus on safety, and then you have to develop a focus in safety. So when you can focus on very specific things to win around, then it's a winning culture versus, again, a fail less. And I'll give you an example. There was a group I worked with years ago, and prior to showing up on their site to assess their culture, I looked at all their data. So I knew, after some analytics that we ran, I knew precisely what they needed to be focusing on. And in my questioning and focus group conversations, one of the simple questions I asked was, what's safety focusing on today? Now, having led hundreds of these projects, still to this day, I've never had the degree of alignment I received from the workforce. Every employee told me the same two things. They were focusing on steel toe policy and housekeeping. Now, initially you're thinking, wow, that's a very well aligned. Well, grounding that in data, having already looked at that, if they were perfect at the two things they were concentrating on, this is a true story, they would have had an 8% impact on their incident rates. I think it was Peter Drucker that said, there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that should not be done at all.
Exactly correct.
So I think the first is a focus, but then also, beyond that is having a coaching leadership and peer-to-peer leadership, a coaching leadership style. Those two things that if we're very focused and we're observing, giving feedback, we're recognizing those that are doing what we want and above and beyond versus just recognizing those that don't, progressive discipline. But I think the first two I would offer up is having a focus in safety and then a style in which we're coaching our performers, our athletes, to be the best that they can be.
Perfect. And we all have our stories on the one group I was working with, and they mandated that management be in the field at least twice a month. They really didn't pulse what happened. There was no accountability for these managers, and the most ironic part, they had to fill an actually about 6-page form, of course, went into a database, and absolutely nothing was done with the data. So just like to your point, the very people that are wanting to get engaged and get this different management in the field and boots on the ground, pretty soon they just mentally went because there was nothing gained from it, and there was no penalty, for lack of a better phrase, or there's no accountability for people who, for some reason, maybe just not choosing a bullet, didn't do them at all. And yet they wanted to hold it up to their clients. They, we did 50 this month. And I said, yeah, but what'd you do with the information? And then you kind of get that deer in the headlights look. So
That's
before,
kind of the saying that careful what you measure, people work towards the measurements. And that's what we've seen in the evolution of metrics by getting to that part where it's three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Most companies, when they start adopting or pursuing leading indicators, to your point, tend to be measurements of activity.
Yeah.
And then we create accountability around those activities versus what you're pointing out. Well, what's the value derived from that? And that's the strategic thinking. We're doing this activity. What's the yield? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yes.
And if visibility of leadership is an objective, okay, well, that's a means. What's the end goal? What are we still, because maybe visibility isn't the answer, but what you've probably seen this as well. It's this attitude of, or mindset, I should say, of we're not where we want, we should do more versus no, more isn't always the answer. Better's the answer. How do we do better? And that means we have to be, to the point you're making, we have to be agreed on really what it is we're trying to accomplish. What does success look like? And then we decide what we're going to do. But most of the time it's, let's go do this. Let's go do that. And it doesn't really yield anything. So you overwhelm the employees, you overwhelm the supervisors with all these new administrative burden, and then they can't be out there in the field doing what we want them to do, coaching and delegating.
Exactly. And I know I've dealt like yourself with a lot of, federal organizations, DOE, NNSA, NRC, and some of their contractors, they really get an old phrase in a sticky wicket from client expectation. One of the organizations I was helping, won't name names, they decided that they want to have a dashboard. They really like that idea of the scorecard. And they had to meet every monthly on it with their customer, and they end up with about a 3 to 4 hour meeting, slides somewhere in the range of at least 75, I think probably close to 125. And they would go through them with the clients, and then I would sit down. The client loved it, so that's the first one that gets kind of twitchy. And then I would sit down with some of the guys over a sandwich or later in the day, and I says, "Is this helping you?" And they look around their shoulder and shake their head no. But they had not taken the time. And I says, "Well, have you talked to your clients? What do they really need?" Because the clients are a little bit cautious. We don't tell you everything to do. So it was both of them looking on the other side of a fence and seeing something different. The client thought that's what they needed to run the organization. They thought that's what the client wanted to hear. I said, "Hey, is there a way to get it down to maybe that significant few?" Well, they weren't sure what that meant. I said, "Well, like you said, get your team together. What's the most important? And then get your clients involved in the conversations."
Absolutely. When you look at measurements, measurements are an advanced level thing. So typically measurements is how do we do?
Yep.
And then you go into, okay, well, do we know why we did what we did? But measurements beyond that, telling you how you did or even, how to get better to a degree. Mm-hmm. Measurements are supposed to prompt, direct, align, and motivate action towards our objectives. Yes. But we tend to measure everything, or we tend to measure what's easy versus measuring what's of value. And that's harder to land on until, like you said, we're involving the stakeholders, we're involving the people where the measurements need to come from. And again, stepping back and saying, is that going to get us closer to where we're trying to go, or is that going to distract us just because it's something that might be easy to measure?
Exactly correct. And I love the phrase stakeholders. I know you appreciate it. I was sitting down with one of my clients a few years ago, big whiteboard. I said, "Okay, who all are your stakeholders?" And so we talked about what that meant. And by the time they got done, there's quite a few people in the room, we probably had 20 to 25 different stakeholders. He says, "We never looked at it that way." And I said, "Okay, guess what? Now we're maybe the first step on a really good journey that can be helping everybody, because now you're recognizing these other data points of the people that have to be interacting. So collectively, you know where you want to be going on your journey to truly help you and provide the value."
And that's one of the big challenges, that once you start with that stakeholder analysis, you know who all the other parties are. Well, we have to move our mindset, mature our mindset that the stakeholders are customers, they're not problems to solve. But then when you look at them as customers, you can't have everybody be your customer right now. Nobody has endless resources. And same thing from a business perspective. If you're in the business of manufacturing coasters or something, you don't manufacture guitars. Guitar players aren't necessarily going to be your customer. So you have to really understand the landscape and with whom you need to best win. And that's why we need the right data to tell us, okay, at this plant or in this services group, we looked at our data And 0 to 1 year on the job represents 45% of our injuries, and we have tenure that goes up to 30 years. Guess who our primary customer needs to be right now? It needs to be that new employee. So that drives decisions around hiring for safety and onboarding effectively. Versus you may look at your data in 20 to 25 year, you haven't had an injury in 5 years. Those aren't the people you need to best serve. But when we think about it strategically, yes, contractors, visitors, community, employees, temporary, they're all management, supervision. Everybody can be a customer, but with whom do we need to win now? And that's why we need good data, and that's why we need a good plan around this.
We need a good plan around. We're going to take a short break. Don't go away. We're going to be talking about perception surveys. Woo! And I'm highly confident Shawn's going to be able to demystify that. Don't go away. This is going to be fascinating.
Safety Culture Strategies provides world-class safety culture and safety program management consultative services for clients throughout the United States. Whether your company is pursuing Voluntary Protection Program STAR designation, ISO 45001 certification, or considering a comprehensive review of your current safety programs and processes, Safety Culture Strategies brings hands-on experience combined with a unique perspective that readily translates from senior management to task-level personnel. This collective skill set provides you with a very insightful health check of your overall safety management system that can also assist with reducing injuries and attrition, as well as increasing profitability. Safety Culture Strategies is also certified to provide Ziegler Institute employee engagement training and leadership coaching. When combined with established relationships with federal and state regulators, Safety Culture Strategies is uniquely positioned to assist the safety culture efforts of any company. For additional information, visit www.scstrat.com or call us at 702-780-1410. After all, every company has a safety culture, but is it the culture you want?
And when we talk about culture, a lot of the discussions come up with organizations, perception surveys. They can be of value, sometimes not as much as they could be. So, Shawn, that's one thing you and I have been talking about off and on the last few days, a couple of weeks now, and you got my undivided interest because you and I are totally aligned on the planets. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations, they'll do that perception survey, they get the data back, and they immediately jump on the low scores. How do we give them higher? And then let's do it again in 90 days, 45 days to see if it got better. And they end up in kind of, I call this death spiral of just looking at versus stepping back. Does this really reflect who we are as an entity? Or perhaps maybe there's a communication problem. So I think you guys have kind of untied that Gordian knot on how to have successful perception surveys, and I know everybody, including me, wants to hear about it. So I queued you up, boss.
Thanks, Mike. So I guess I would start with, companies often ask, is it more of value to do a perception survey or focus group interviews? So if value is the answer, I would say focus group conversations with people. But a lot of people, rightfully so and understandably so, pursue perception surveys. And you and I both do them. A lot of companies do. But what are you comparing? What are you going to do with that information? Because like you said, either it's viewed like an audit and negative effects follow. So you teach the organization to give the desired answer rather than the honest answer. Or worse, we do absolutely nothing with it. And it's a black hole safety system out there. And what's the point of doing it in the future? They don't do anything with this information anyway, so you can skew the results. And it doesn't take much to skew the results. We've seen them after a reduction in force. You know, we've seen them after a favored employee has been disciplined at a location. So they can be quite volatile. But surveys by themselves tell you what you know to ask about in advance. What they don't tell you is the why. And if you really back up and think about it, perception surveys are a lagging indicator because they're telling you beliefs that exist. It's a result of today. What's leading to that is what's creating. So I have a model that I put together a few years ago that teaches why perceptions are important but very limited in being a focal point. So perceptions impact your attitude. So if I think it's a good idea to stop a job for a concern, or if I think it's not a good idea, or if I think my boss really supports or doesn't support, it's going to affect my attitude. And over time, that'll affect the values. And the values, the belief systems can change in an organization. But those perceptions then are carried out in the decisions of individuals. So if I think it's a good idea to stop a job, I'll make a different decision. Now, before somebody acts on that decision, they have an expectation of what will occur. And in psychology, we teach that all disappointment is based on a set level of expectations. If you've ever been disappointed, it's because your expectations weren't being met. So before somebody acts on that, they have an expectation. Now, when they act on that decision, they have an experience. Now, here's how this happens culturally. If they have a good experience, they're not going to tell a lot of stories to others because they expected to have a good experience. Why would they brag about it? If they have a great experience, I might tell a few people because they were pleasantly surprised or it exceeded their expectations. But if they have a bad experience, what we tell is the more negative the experience, the louder the storytelling in the organization that either confirms or conflicts with what we want.
Absolutely.
So that's why, perception's great, but if you don't know, just like behaviors will never be the root cause of an injury. There's always an influence, a reason for the behavior. Same thing with perceptions. Like you're saying, Mike, you could target changing one belief that you say, oh, that's horrible. And you spend a lot of time and energy and it does absolutely nothing to change your organizational cultures. That's why I believe surveys are great. You can benchmark, but you're benchmarking against those who took the survey. So it's almost kind of a so what? What if they're poor? What if the average customer of that survey tool wasn't really great? Or are you truly benchmarking against world class, but world class when, right? So I'm a fan of, there's nothing wrong. Most companies like yours and mine, we have the standard surveys that you can measure against. I'm more of a fan of defining what you want from a belief standpoint, knowing where you're at, saying what beliefs, if became game changers, if it became a reality, would be a game change, and then measuring those and then working to understand what's currently perpetuating the good ones and what would have to change in the experiences and stories in order for the byproduct of perceptions to, as a default, change. Exactly. So just surveys by themselves, limited of value except to measure progress. But you could also, I've seen companies have better safety improvement despite the horrible things they were doing to their workforce. So it's an indicator. It's not the only indicator.
Exactly. I know one of the organizations I was working with, and they had this one questionnaire they would use, and literally it was, do we do this? And so it kind of plateaued. There's a shocker, right? And I says, tell you what, I says, if we can have an experiment, I said, I'd like just, you pick your management team, we do a shorter version. Can we change that to how well we do this? And they went, ooh. And I says, and then now can we consider like a red, yellow, green, some type of gradient? So that way you start realizing, because if you have an area that you identify you're not doing well, that may help you start aiming to a different target versus do we do it or not? And you end up with the binary switch, right? And so then pretty soon everything's yeses because you don't want to say no.
But even positive perceptions, that I found to be dangerous if not careful, if it's not grounded in reality. It's kind of we only know what we only know, or we're breathing our own exhaust. We're not looking at this from other points of view. And I'll give you an example. There was a paper mill that I worked with, and a perception survey went out corporate wide. And one of the statements at one of the sites that I led a team to go to the focus group afterwards, but one of the statements had to do with the reporting and communication of incident and event related data. And there was very high scores that, yes, we get the details that we need in order to affect, future safety performance. I get all the details necessary, et cetera. Yet when we looked at what was common in the collection of the investigation or the incident, and then what was communicated, it was stuff like a technician fractured left elbow.
Wow.
That's it. Now the employees, in their defense, good people, well-intended individuals, but they only knew what they only knew. Right. And to them, that was good, so it was rated high. Why even need to look at that? So we would have missed a huge necessary improvement opportunity because the survey was good.
Yeah. I heard about it. Okay, real quick, and this is fun stuff, and I encourage everybody, you got to check out the website. And to your credit, both you and Terry, you have been very open and candid. You have some phenomenal white papers posted on your website that people can download at no charge, and it really helps set the stage. I would encourage any company thinking about a retreat, because you like to do those on occasion, grab 2 or 3 of them off his website and actually talk to Shawn to begin with and get some ideas. Use someone to facilitate some of your discussions during your retreat. Here's another one of my many pet rocks we all have, or pet peeves. What's a better way to do something with all these audits and surveillances that companies get subjected to? A lot of times with the best of intentions, and yet it appears they kind of get overwhelmed.
Yeah, especially organizations, government organizations, organizations that serve government entities, or there's some things we're not going to get away from that are just going to be unfortunately baked in, because we don't have that higher level strategic thinking respectfully when we're looking at all of this. A lot of it sometimes, to be blunt, is kind of a CYA type of thing to make sure we're driving accountability to the lowest level down to the contractors. And I get that. But I think there needs to be a better partnership between contractor and client. I mean, it just came out a few months ago, the Challenger mini-part series on Netflix. And if you haven't seen it, it's a wonderful view of this horrible event that happened back in 1986. But it shows the clash. It shows the misalignment between expectations. And a lot of times the expectations of results are clear, but not the expectations of what we need to do to yield those results. So it's a lot easier to just audit. So it's kind of like lagging indicators. I think that's going to be a part of a lot of organizations, at least over the next 10 years, on how they measure success, even though you and I know the severe limitations of that. But I think from an audit standpoint, we haven't really backed up, and I know you and I have talked about this, is what's the value of this? And so many organizations, the audits become a fault find, or they become a what's wrong to fix. So you get a lot of people, especially when the audits are all announced, that you clean everything up, you get everything ready, and then you go back. It's not really cultural. It's just in response to the auditor that we know is coming. Yeah. But I think there's 2 things. I think there are some specific aspects you want expertise in to audit or assess against, because no one can be all-knowing about everything. So there is some specificity needed. And you also have to be careful that it's not an audit that looks at everything. I had a site in California, and they were doing all of these different audits, and it went down to even auditing from a peer-to-peer standpoint. And it started actually with a really good focus on a couple of key continuous improvement areas. Right. And being from Texas, I kind of gave this thing a name. But I called it a sensuous audit. Well, sensuous out there. You want to look for this, you want to look for this, you want to look for this.
I love it.
So it was a sensuous audit. And it became multiple pages, front and back, 8 to 10 point font. And, it was actually providing no value whatsoever. So I think you look at, there's a super major organization that they have their operational, call it management system. And it's actually a really good audit, because they're looking at what's going right, and the goal is to continuously improve.
Perfect.
But they also, in order to move up in the organization, you need to move through this team, because they want the future leaders to be thinking about all the important aspects of our business. Beautiful. So when you become a leader in this space at a functional higher level, you'll have got, so I think there is value. But to me, it goes back to this common issue we see, that let's just throw more, and more, without ever really, again, backing up and saying, what are we trying to accomplish? And are we doing a lot more than what's necessary? A lot of things we do in safety are quite inefficient, and just finding ways to make them more efficient, I think, is a great opportunity for companies.
I think you're right on target. I tell people, a lot of times the best solutions are the people that carry tools for a living. They truly understand. Well, I stole this phrase years ago. Work is conducted versus as imagined, right? Because they understand what it really takes. But before we get to the end, and when I get guests like you, and I can tell this time flies, what's a good way for people to get hold of you, Shawn?
I'm on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, not that much on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We're on everything. But just go to our website, proactsafety.com, and that's an easy way to contact us. And I'd be happy to have a conversation, schedule something with our staff.
That'd be perfect. So just kind of listing a few things for everybody viewing today. You really want to have a strategy for some of these approaches, right? And you got to figure out what your current level of maturity of an organization before you grab a given initiative and say, well, let's throw this on the wall and see if it sticks. You need to have a coaching style. You want to have a leadership organization that can be engaging, and you need to clearly understand the why, and your perception surveys or the feedback you're getting, so your response. So did I kind of capture those on target a little bit for you?
Perfectly. You're a great listener.
That's why I'm not that smart. I got a little bit of a good memory and a fairly strong ink pen. So before we get out of here, you're at a convention. You might have done this once or twice in your career, probably hundreds. So you've been on stage. Everybody's been listening to you intently, and you have the C-suite, the senior safety people, and maybe some mid-level safety people. After all the applause and they go to leave, what's a couple of things you want to make sure they wrote down and take back to their office?
I'll end then, thank you, with one of the things I began with, a constant search for providing value to and from our customers. Are we doing things that are truly going to move the needle in any area of operations? Safety is the area you and I are passionate about. And are we doing things that create the perception of value? That is so much harder, but the culture will be why our compliance and our advanced efforts succeed and fail. We are either managing that which creates our culture, or we're going to be managed by it.
Wow, right on target. And once again, the Shawn Galloway ProAct Safety, you got to check out their website, get a hold of this guy, go check out their white papers. You're going to be amazed. So as we go to close today, I always like to have some passing thoughts. Found a great quote from Christopher Columbus. You can never cross the ocean until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. Feel free to reach out and touch base with me at any time through Safety Culture Strategies. It's www.scstrat.com. You can reach me via email at mike@scstrat.com, office 702-780-1410. Until next time, enjoy your safety culture journey. Take care.